This is January 2024 in Seoul, Korea. So this is going to be a brief history of the Harmsen family. This is for Zoe and Zack, so you can find out a little bit about the name that you carry. Harmsen is a name in several countries in Northern Europe. And we are from the German branch. It is also in Denmark, and it is in the Netherlands, and now some people also live in England. And obviously I don't live there, and I'm an American citizen, born in America. So I'll be talking about the background of Harmsen. So I was born in Michigan, in the United States, and in a city called Muskegon, which is on the west coast. You have a major city there called Grand Rapids in Kent County in Michigan, and I was born in Muskegon. So this is basically from the Muskegon, Michigan branch. But the Harmsen family is basically a German, a Dutch, Danish, and now also English and American name. So I will talk a little bit further. So your grandmother and I actually made a visit years ago to see where my father's mother came from. And we discovered her birth certificate. This is my father's mother, that being my paternal grandmother, was born in a place in Germany. And we toured around and stuff like that, and I became interested in the Harmsen family, so I did some research. Now, the Harmsen family in the United States is spread all over, and many of us are not related to each other. When your grandmother and I actually visited my father's mother's hometown, there were about 35 people in the phone book, and that's in Germany again. And so Harmsen is a common name in Germany, and as I mentioned, you have about 1,000 names of people named Harmsen in the United States, only U.S. I know this because we bought a book that had a listing of all of them. And so the Harmsens have been in the United States for a long time. So my father's mother came in the 1880s as a young girl, roughly around about the age of 8 years old, and immigrated with her family. And so at that time you had a group of people from that area called a county of Germany that immigrated to Michigan, and they immigrated to the area of Kent County and also Allegan, and then also another county, which I've forgotten the name of it, Ottawa County. So we have been established in the United States for a long time. And as I mentioned, we are scattered around. I was traveling many years ago in South America, and I was down in Peru, and I found a Harmsen family in Peru. So the Harmsen family, meaning people with the name of Harmsen, are scattered around the world. We're in Canada and Australia and South America, and I'm sure, and now in Asia. And so it's a common name. And so my father's mother, my grandmother, came as a young girl, and then she married, well, obviously her name was not Harmsen, but she married a man called Harmsen. And so that's the system in the United States. The woman takes the man's name when she marries. And so I grew up in Kent County, where I spent about 3 years in Muskegon, and then I moved to a small town in Ottawa County, which is outside, about northwest of Grand Rapids, Michigan. and I lived there for a number of years. And then eventually we moved to another city, a suburb of Grand Rapids called Granville. So in middle school and high school, I went to school in Granville. And so I have one older brother. There's only two of us. One older brother, his name is Ronald. His full name is Ronald Dale. Now, my legal name is Bruce, and my family calls me Bruce, but I prefer the name I picked for myself, which is Eric. That's E-R-I-K. And that's basically a Northern European name, because you have other variations and spellings of Eric. So I'll be using the name Eric now when I talk. So your grandmother in Korea here knows me as Eric, and most people will know me as Eric as long as it's informal. And if it's formal then or legal, then it becomes Bruce. So my legal name is Bruce Howard Harmsen. Howard is the name of my father's first name. And so my mother's first name was Janet, Janet, and her family name was Cracker, Kraker. And she was raised a little bit across the river, which was the Grand River, in Allendale, Michigan. And so I went to high school. I went to Christian school for many years, and I went to the elementary school and then the primary school. That's primary school. And then I went to middle school, and then high school. I went to a school called Unity Christian. And so I graduated at age 17 from Unity Christian. And 1 month later, I had actually decided at age 16, I was going to join the United States Air Force. Now, the system at that time was basically that kids, when they were growing up, had to help both their mother and father, and then also get other part-time jobs. So my first part-time job outside my family was delivering the Grand Rapids Press, which was the local newspaper. Grand Rapids was a big city in the area. You can find it on the map. It's the number 2 city in Michigan after Detroit. And so I started delivering papers when I was 9 years old, because my brother was 12 years old, and you had to be 12 years old to have it's called a paper route. So we split it. We had roughly about 70 people, and we split it. And we lived in Lamont at that time. It's Lamont. And so he went one way, and I went another way. And so, as I said, I was about 9 years old, and that meant I was still in primary school. So in Michigan at that time, a child could open a bank account. And to open a bank account, you had to have $25 as initial deposit. So my father put out $25 to open my account in my name, and that was in my name, not his name, my name. It was my sole account. My brother had one too. And so when I was working from age 9, I saved my money and I deposited it into my own bank account. And that went all the way through elementary school and up into junior high school and then Unity Christian. So as I mentioned, when I was 16 years old, I decided I was going to join the Air Force. That means United States Air Force. Now, at that time, there was a draft system. That meant that when you were 18 years old, you had to register for the draft. That means to become a soldier. So if you were waited to be drafted, you would be drafted for 2 years into the U.S. Army. And then they would stick you in anything they wanted to do. You had no choice. But if you wanted to volunteer for the U.S. Army as a volunteer, it was 3 years. And then you had a little more choice of what job you had. Well, I wanted to basically learn a skill. That was my idea, is to learn a skill. So that's why I picked the Air Force and spent 4 years in the Air Force from 17 to 21. And so I had a skill. I learned a skill. I learned how to become an analyst. So my job title was management analyst, and it basically dealt with money. And we studied what was going on in the United States Air Force only. It was not political and it was not economic. It was just talking about the United States Air Force Command I was in. And so I worked there for 4 years, and then after 4 years I left, and then I went back to Michigan, and when I was in the Air Force in January of 1963, I'd finished my basic training and advanced training and started my job, which I held for 3.5 years in San Antonio, Texas. And I worked in a small group in a what they call it, an office, and I was 18 years old, and I was there until I turned 21, and then I was discharged just short about 1 or 2 months, about 2 months short of my 22nd birthday. And I enjoyed it, and I learned a skill. And so after starting my January job, during the daytime, we call it a soldier. Technically, they're called airmen, but the general term is soldier. I was a soldier, and I started night school at San Antonio College, which is a junior college, meaning 2 years, first 2 years of college in San Antonio, Texas. And so I was doing two things at the same time. And I was interested in two things. Number one is getting the skill, as I said, and secondly, I wanted to get some college at night school. So that's why I would go into night school. So after I finished the military after 4 years, and then I turned 21 and then 22. At 22, I came back to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then I was there for 1 year because I'd finished my first year in San Antonio at night school over about 3.5 years. And then I spent 1 year in Grand Rapids, Michigan Junior College, and then graduated there. And then I went off to Michigan State University, which was in East Lansing, Michigan. And that was a 4-year college. And so I spent 4 years there in San Antonio College, and then Grand Rapids Junior College, and then Grand Rapids Michigan State University. And then after Michigan State, I graduated, and then I went out and I had some jobs. So now the reason I'm talking about this is everything changes, times change. So at that time, the normal procedure when you graduated, well, first of all, when you were in the higher level of elementary school, also called primary school, you had a part-time job. That means outside your family. Now, I'd help my mother and father. My father was born on a farm, and he could do anything. And so my brother and I helped both my mother and my father. We did the girls' work, and we did the boys' work. And my mother always wanted to have a daughter, but we never did. So the two boys learned how to do all kinds of stuff. And as I mentioned, my father grew up on a farm. When you grow up on a farm, you learn all kinds of stuff. So my father grew up on a 90-acre dairy cattle farm just outside the village of Lamont. And I mention that because that was a good-sized farm. And so what happened then is I was in the university and I studied there, and I moved on, and then eventually I got another degree, a master's degree in Ohio at a place called Ohio University. And I got another degree in, you have to think a moment, in the University of Maryland. So I have a very unique situation. I graduated 4 times with 4 degrees, and I had 5 different majors. A major is the main area of study that you have. And when you're in a university, then you can have 1 major, or 2 majors, or 3 majors, or 4 majors. And so I had unusual background in my history, major was the thing I was mainly interested in, with also anthropology, and then political science, and then psychology. And then later I got another degree, and I learned industrial arts, which basically was to get certification, university certification, so I could become a New York State elementary, well, actually it was elementary school all the way to high school industrial arts teacher. But I kind of decided against it. I decided I'd focus on history. And so then that's basically a little bit of the background. Now, the big difference was that things were very cheap at that time. Everything was cheap. And so my father told me that when I was in high school yet, that he and his mother had talked it over, and they said that when I graduated from high school, I was on my own. I mean, they were not going to pay for my education at the university or college. And so, and this was normal procedure at that time. Kids were expected to work in, particularly in middle school and high school, and then later in the university to pay your way through. So I was financially independent of my parents, financially, which meant my parents did not pay anything for my university, and they didn't pay anything for when I was in the military. At 18, I was on my own, which is one reason I decided to go in the military, because I figured I'd have 4 years, and 4 years would teach me a skill that I could use when I finished my military service. So when I finished the military service, I decided I'd go to university, because they had I'm talking about 2 years in the university after the junior college. And they had a new program called the GI Bill at that time, which means the government would say anybody that served in the military, either 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, could get some assistance from the United States government called the GI Bill. GI was a term they used for a military soldier. So I was entitled to 36 months on the GI Bill. And so I used that both at Grand Rapids Junior College and also after I got out. And then the Michigan State, because it only started in July of 1962, and I got discharged in May of 1962. So I was very lucky. I got out and I immediately started school. So I had part-time jobs when I was in the Grand Rapids Junior College and also in Michigan State. So the whole point I'm talking about all this is things change, and things were cheap, and that's the key word there. Things were cheap and not expensive like they are now. Now the university is incredibly expensive, very, very expensive. And so I could finance myself, my university and junior college for 1 year by getting part-time job, and part-time job just means you're obviously working a short time. And I had all kinds of jobs just to support myself because I had to pay my own tuition. And so basically that's what I'm giving to you. I'm giving you a little bit idea. Now in Michigan there were quite a few Harmsens scattered around, and some of us were our own family. I come from a family, my father was one of 5 children. They had 3 boys and 2 girls. And so they were there, and then we had some other Harmsen families. So Harmsen was a very common name in western Michigan. And they were not related to us. There were other families. And so basically that's a little bit of a history of Harmsen. And so I even bought a book some years later of the Harmsens across the United States. And as I mentioned before, there were 1,000 different names, Harmsen, only in the United States. And I looked at the internet and I found out Harmsen in some other countries. As I mentioned, I was in Peru, and I found them in Peru, and they were scattered around in other countries. As I mentioned, England and Denmark and Netherlands. So Harmsen is basically Danish name, Denmark. It's also a German name, and it's also Netherlands name. Those are the basic ones. And then later they became an American name and a British name. So that's a little bit of background about your name and what you carry, because there's quite a few Harmsens scattered around the world. And sometimes I read something in a newspaper or something like that, or somebody from Canada or from Britain is published, or Australia has printed something or said something on their name. So Harmsen is a common name, and it's scattered around. So I'm going to end this right now, and I'll talk about it later another time.